Your AI agent happily says, done, but then when you run some basic checks, like unit tests or linting, and everything is broken. This was constantly happening to me until I applied this simple technique that I'm gonna share with you today. Hi, my name is Eugene and this is Crafted Bytes. And today I'm gonna share with you a technique that I call a task completion protocol. It takes just 5 lines in your AGENTS.md and it will force your AI model to make sure everything is done according to your definition of done. And I will also share with you an interesting issue that I faced just a few weeks ago. And the issue was that one particular AI model running in a particular AI agent was constantly skipping this instruction. And I will show you why, just in a few moments. So, let me do some demo and show you why stricter definition of done is actually important. And before we move on, I will run repository level tests, and just so we are absolutely sure repository was in a green state before we do any changes. As you can see, all tests are passed. Now, let's ask the model to do some change. For example, let's ask it to simplify this function. So simplify this function and let's sort just by value. In reality, of course, you will do more complex stuff and probably not just using the prompt like this, but it doesn't really matter. Important is what model thinks is done is not gonna always match to what repository defines as done. So you can see it changed like what we ask, sorting by value, and all tests pass, and we can see that it actually executed those tests. And now let's actually see if all tests pass. So make test again, exciting. And now we can see that all tests are actually not all of them. This might be fine if you are more involved into the process. You may be asking your agent to do smaller things here and there, and then, in the end, when it completes the work, you will probably run some checks, fix remaining issues, review the code, I hope, and this can be considered as done. However, I personally find myself doing more complex agentic flows, and this might be agentic loops, but honestly, I started being more careful with those, and I started experimenting with different kinds of multi-agent workflows. In any case, this is a bigger topic on its own, and I will probably record something on that. For now, let's imagine we want to use the agentic loop to build some cool big feature. Typically, the agentic loop will have few phases, something like that, like a planning phase, and then the agent will split the work on multiple tasks. It may be 3 or 5 or even more, it doesn't really matter. And by the time one completes the task and reports done, the next one starts with already a broken state. And it may report something like that. I am done, but I faced unrelated test failure. And this accumulates quickly. And I've seen agents doing very weird stuff in cases like that. So, when this work finally completes and your main agent reports done, you may find your codebase in a very weird state. So, let's finally see how to fix it. Okay, so this is a template repository that I use pretty often to work on various stuff. I have a bigger video explaining its structure and various decisions that I made. We'll leave a link on it in a description. Also, it is probably worth mentioning that these days I find myself doing more of a full stack kind of a work, and I plan to convert this repository to more of a monorepo kind of a structure, with backend and front-end parts. It is probably worth a separate video, so let's not waste a lot of time on it. Let's actually focus on the task completion protocol. So this template obviously includes this agents.md file, and when you scroll a little bit down, you will find a task completion protocol section. Well, I mentioned that it is just 5 lines, and in this repository it is a little bit longer. However, the idea is pretty simple. You need to tell model the exact steps it has to do to report completion. And this is exactly what it is. So always perform these steps before reporting completion. For this repo, it is just this stuff. For other repo or in monorepo, you can split it by modules. You can obviously do other checks, but the idea is the same. It is also worth mentioning that this reporting section is here for a reason, and I'll explain you why in a second. And also, you can see that I have a coding task completion protocol and non-coding task completion protocol. I added it because very often, well, maybe not often, but it happens so that the agent is working on something else, like markdown files or different kind of a work. And in that case, it makes no sense to force it to run those usually somewhat expensive steps if it is just updating README or writing a skill or doing a similar non-coding work. So because of that, there is a clear split of coding and non-coding task. So let's probably do the following. Remember this experiment I did on a very start of the video. Now I will repeat exactly the same set of steps, but in this case I will make sure that the repo includes the task completion protocol. And let's see what happens. Okay, let's try to repeat our original experiment. Before we move on, I just want to make sure our repository is clean, so I reversed all the changes, and let's make sure tests are green. And also, our AGENTS.md now includes the task completion protocol. It is identical to the one you have just seen. So repo is green, task completion protocol is in place. So let's rerun the task. And if you remember, it was to just simplify this function. Oh, I can simply copy it from here, and we'll just run it. Let's see what happens. So it started doing this stuff, exactly same set of steps, but let's see what it is actually doing next. So instead of running if you go back, if we go back to this previous run, you can see that it is executed just affected tests. And here it executed all the tests as per our task completion protocol. And obviously additional tests failed, so it made those changes as well, and then repeated the run, and now finally all good. And let's just double check it to make sure. So make tests. I hope it will be green now. Yoo-hoo! And now this is done. And remember the reporting part. This one. Let me finally explain why we need it. So, while working with various AI models, I noticed that sometimes they report that everything is done, but when you actually review chat history, you will not see any evidence that it actually ran any checks. So here, for example, we can clearly see that it actually ran make test and only then reported all good. So my theory is that sometimes AI is just trying to predict the outcome instead of doing the work. And this form of reporting, it is not actually for humans, it is for AI model itself. And this dynamic part is especially important. In my case, it's a test coverage. However, if you are not collecting test coverage, which I highly suggest you do, you can use any dynamic metric, for example, test execution time. And this is gonna force AI model to actually run those checks so then it could report the results correctly. And it looks like tricks like this are gonna be the way we are motivating our new AI teammates to actually do the work. And now let's see how this bigger loop example changes. You don't ever need to change any prompt or something. Your repository already defines what done means. So when agent is working on a task, it will have to run those checks when it is done building. And if there is any issue, it will have to go and fix it. And then redo the check and only then report done. So by the time this bigger loop finishes, chances your repository is in a done state are somewhat higher. And remember I mentioned this issue that I faced with one particular harness, where the model was constantly skipping task completion protocol checks. Let me finally reveal the mystery. The harness is Codex. And the model I faced this issue with was Codex Spark. And I later learned that it applies to any model running inside of Codex. And it's actually quite easy to troubleshoot issues like that. Let me ask the model why it is doing that. So, please explain why you are skipping task completion checks. Let's see what it tells us. And obviously each time you run it, it's gonna tell something different. But usually it's gonna be something like that. This session also has high priority instructions, saying that validation tests should not be run unless explicitly requested and blah blah blah. In any case, what that means is, no matter what you place in your AGENTS.md, it's not gonna do it unless you type it explicitly, something like please run tests. Otherwise, it's not gonna do it automatically. And I later learned that it was actually discovered by another person on Reddit way before me. And they faced it with GPT 5.4 high. So keep that in mind, that if you are facing this issue where your model is not always running those checks, don't blame the model right away. Sometimes it may be harness that is forcing the model to behave like that. Task completion protocol defines a clear finish line for the agent, and I find it especially useful in bigger agentic loops. I think I already mentioned how it helps there, and I plan to record another video to show different techniques that I use for tasks of a different size. And if you are already using techniques like that to define a finish line for your agent, please drop it in the comments. Would love to see how you define what finish line is. And I guess that's it for today. Thanks for watching and see you in my next video. Bye!